All right, you who has hit play, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to anyone who may be new today. Everybody else, what's up? How is everyone doing? Things are really gearing up around here. I'm 5 days away from the grand opening party and 7 days away from the start of classes at the new center. We have mostly finished like the painting and the situating. We've still, tying up some ends here and there on that stuff. And I mentioned last week, I think, that there was a reporter who had interviewed me. Well, that article got published and it got quite a lot of coverage. A lot of people saw it. And a couple of people mentioned that they saw it to me. So there's all kinds of a buzz going on. And now I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about the last 2 weeks of podcast episodes. I'm thinking about the episode that I did with Sheila and Ravi from the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. And then last week I had my friend Manu on and we were talking business stuff. And I'm reflecting on what role I think I am to play as a yoga teacher now. Like, my idea about what my role is as a teacher has changed over the years. And it's been a long time since I had a yoga center and I was looking to create like a space like that for people to come to. For years leading up until the pandemic, I was traveling. And anyone who's done both knows there's a big difference between when you swoop into someone's town and have a weekend shindig and then you take off compared to, setting up shop in your neighborhood. And another thing about the setting up shop in my neighborhood, many of you know that the name of this yoga center is the Birdhouse Yoga Center, and it is inspired by me watching these house sparrows in my backyard make a nest in this birdhouse that my father-in-law built for us. And the funny thing about that is over the last 2 weeks, while we've been working on the space, me and my wife, it's basically been the same thing. If you've ever watched house sparrows, they kind of come in, the female comes in, does some things and leaves, and the male comes in, does some things, and then they see each other for a little while and then they fly, you see them building the nest in tandem together, And if you could see a time lapse of the door to the yoga center, which funny enough has been painted with a huge black circle around the door. And so if you could see a time lapse, you would see me and my wife coming in and out over the last week building this nest. And it's essentially done. And now it comes down to the actual work of it, or the actual practice of showing up and engaging in the practice with people. And I'm reflecting on what a post-lineage time it is. Maybe you've heard that term before. We've been throwing it around for a lot of years, this idea of where yoga teachers draw their sense of tradition from when they're not aligned with a particular guru or coming from some established institution of yoga learning. So many of us came into a yoga at a time where if you didn't have a guru, then you were sort of a rogue. And there were examples for that, examples of rogue teachers, And now basically everybody's a rogue teacher in a way. And I think it's, largely just because of all of the downfalls of these guru figures, these god men who show themselves to be much less than God. And it's something we've talked about many times on the show of how there's a reconciliation that has to happen inside a person to make sense of it, to make sense of all the valuable transformational teachings that come through yoga that have been passed down from teachers to students for years and years, and the sort of dogmas and abuses of power and misogyny that is baked into different cultures and traditions of yoga that don't align with the way people exist in the world now. So how do you honor the past, honor the traditions, and still be true to you and the time that you live in now? And how do you take the good from these teachers who did bad and still make sure to, I don't know, situate them or talk about them in ways that still reflect your values and aren't perpetuating cycles of abuse and wrongdoing, you know? So many of us have grappled with this. And it's always helpful when someone adds to that conversation in a way that makes you think about stuff. And that is certainly true of my guests today, Nischala Joy Devi and Kamala Rose. Many of you, I'm sure, already know Nischala. She's been on this show more times than anyone else. I think actually she now holds the record for most appearances on this show. But she has never come on with Kamala before. They are currently working on a book project together. It is entitled A Woman's Gita, a contemporary version of the Bhagavad Gita by and for Western women. And many of you may have heard Nischala's previous appearance where we talked about her rendition of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and now she's working on a translation of the Gita. And I think that Nischala and Kamala are taking on this question of honoring tradition and aligning with our values for today in a very heads-on way in this new book. They also have a podcast by the same name that they're doing as they're in the process of writing the book. I was so happy that they reached out to me, and like I said, I think it really adds some interesting perspective and questions for us to consider moving forward. So couldn't be happier to have had this conversation with them. It is my pleasure to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that I have a new group starting in my teacher training coming up October 21st. If you are looking to reignite your teaching and need some new inspiration, or maybe you want to fill out your knowledge base and feel like you know what you're doing and why you're doing it a little bit more, maybe you just want to be in the company of other people who are passionate about a deep inquiry into yoga. If so, I encourage you to check it out. Maybe it is a right training for you. We've got a new group starting October 21st. If teacher training feels like a little too much and you still want to connect with me, there's lots of ways for us to do that. There's ongoing live classes. There's a weekly discussion group. Or maybe you just want to support this show and get access to the full-length archives by becoming a podcast premium subscriber. You can find all of this stuff, the teacher training and the rest, at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think that is plenty good. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Nischala Joy Devi and Kamala Rose. Hi.
Hey. Nice to meet you, Jay.
Nice to meet you, Kamala. Nice to meet you very much. And Nischala, good to see you.
Great to see you, Jay. How you doing?
I'm doing okay, all things considered. I'm in the midst of trying to open a yoga center. You can see it behind me. And I haven't done that. I did that. I had a place for 10 years and it's been since 2017. And I swore it off like I would never do that, such a thing again. And then there was some divine interventions that have taken place. And so here we are again. And today was a little bit of a stressful day, just dealing with some like building codes and kind of some really stressful things, but we're moving forward and I'm here to talk with you. So I'm happy to set all of that aside for now.
Well, congratulations. Where is it?
It's in Easton, Pennsylvania, which is where I live.
Okay.
And I live in this little neighborhood and it's really for the people in the neighborhood. And I've had a lot of people expressing some excitement about its opening. So
congratulations.
Lots happening, which hasn't been the case over the last few years. So to feel like inspiration and some momentum, it's been really, really good. I'm grateful.
Yeah.
I also live in a small town with a small studio, and the relationship with just a small number of people as their yoga teacher and as their yoga center is, I think, very meaningful service. And anyway, support you. Send a lot of love and prayers your way.
You know, the room in Brooklyn, I had like a 40-person size room, and this is like maximum like 8 people. So we're working at a different scale. And I'm really getting back to some things. I remember the very first time you were on the show, Nischala. And just to say, I'm already recording. So please, let's consider ourselves having just begun, if that's okay with you all.
Yeah.
Good.
Of course.
Well,
thanks for the warning.
Yes, I don't want us to say anything that we don't. We can edit out later, but I try not to do that. So the first time you were on the show, Nischala, you said something that I'll never forget when you talked about when you first started charging money for yoga. And you said the yoga's free, but the electricity is not.
That's right.
And but trying to get back, honestly, to like just doing straight like $15 per class per student, like no class packs, no memberships, which is kind of crazy, but it keeps everything clean, you know, like it used to be before it got so mixed up. So I'm really kind of just getting back to like the roots, which it seems like you two are interested in as well. So,
well, you know, one thing I just want to say what that does when you do it just per class like that, it makes it you're present. And it also moves it one step away from the gyms because that's what they do. So it's on the path, which I'm hoping for, to bring it back to yoga again. And let's just bring it back in a small way, simple, to yoga and see what happens. Yoga is magical. Let's see what happens with it.
Amen. Yeah. We are singing the same song.
Yeah.
And let us get to what brings us together today, because everybody listening to this is well aware that Nischala is maybe the only woman or one of the few women to ever do and we discussed this last time, I think it was interpretation or rendition of the Yoga Sutras.
Version, or whatever you want to call it.
Version, we talked about that. You know, I remember having conversation about translations versus renditions and whatnot. But everybody's very familiar with that. And I know I'm not the only one who deeply appreciated that contribution because it really offered a new perspective and way of thinking about sutras that I think started a lot of important conversations, and many of us appreciated it. But I don't know that everybody listening is aware that you are currently in the process of doing something similar with the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes.
I think that's pretty cool. I've had a number of people on to talk about the Bhagavad Gita before. I've been listening to the new podcast that you two started, where you've been talking about the process and what you're working through with it. And I really think you guys have some sort of new things that you're bringing, some new perspectives on it that I haven't heard before. So I'm very excited to have you here. Thank you so much for reaching out and making the time.
Thanks for having us, Jay. It's great. It's always great to be back with you anyway. We always have fun in our conversations. Cool. Yes.
Well, to get us started, you know, initially you've been here a few times before, and we have quite a lot of background on you, but we don't have as much background about Kamala. And I listened to something that you said, and we share some unusual roots before we found our way to our spiritual inquiries. Specifically, I heard you mention that you had a formative time in the Los Angeles punk scene. And I grew up in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley. And while I really wasn't so much in the punk scene there, certainly like my freshman year of college, like the Fugazi album of 13 songs, I just don't think I could have gotten through that year without that album. And I've always made like a connection between like punk rock and yoga. Like the rishis were very punk rock in my mind. And I'm just sort of curious to commune with you on that. How do you think that there is some kind of connection between like punk rock and yoga?
I absolutely do. And that was why I dropped out of the world around 1993. I was involved in anti-war activism and starting to see some of the things that were happening, Rodney King, things like that were happening in our world. And I was on the punk scene. And the company that I ended up working for, our slogan was "Corporate rock still sucks." And this idea that we're in a corporatocracy now, it's hard to win. What do you do to say that you reject it? For me, punk rock was that idea that the beat was so fast that it agitated you. And I felt like we should be agitated in our world. There's so many things going on that are so objectionable. And, especially when you're in your early 20s and you're, terribly optimistic and, just thinking you're going to be anybody.
And the harsh reality of the world just comes crashing in on you at like 22 or whatever, right?
Yes, this is when I had a baby. And so I became a mother at this time. And when you have children, everything now changes. But the same idea of what punk rock had stirred in me, that this is fundamentally wrong, this world, there's something wrong with it that I need to stand in objection to. Now I'm a mother and I have to worry about the future for my son. And anyway, this is why I decided to become a monastic and leave the world and sort of balance for a while the being a mother and being a monk. And eventually my son went to go live with his dad and continued to live a pretty punk rock lifestyle. He's still there. And I went into the monastery and started studying Patanjali. And I definitely felt like these people renounced the world. They renounced it for the same reason that I did, that they saw suffering all around and no really great answers to what to do about it. Everyone's just going through the motions, being their cog in the wheel, and it's not working. And I think when you have a spiritual awakening, it really drives you from the inside. And when I first started meditation, I started my practice, I had a pretty big spiritual awakening, that cosmic consciousness, where I felt like that was the high I was chasing at all those crowd surfing and mosh pit events. And I understood it to be exactly what Patanjali was talking about. I was reading the Yoga Sutras, I was having experience in cosmic consciousness, and I said, this is the revolution. This is it. So that's how I spent the next 30 years of my life.
Wow. I mean, I get that connection of seeing the world at that particular time in your life and being like, this is horrible. Like, why is it like this? And I don't want to have anything to do with it. It's certainly why I ended up being a yoga teacher, because it's like back in the early 90s, yoga was a totally counterculture move. It was because you didn't want to have an office job or wear a suit or do what your dad did or whatever. But I have to say, I'm also a father, and the choice to go into a monastic lifestyle, and even having already been a parent, like that must have been a huge choice, like a really deep decision. And you mentioned that it's likely an experience that you had that made you feel that this was the right thing to do, because I could imagine other people around you thinking that that's a very crazy thing to do.
Yeah, certainly. But I in addition to Patanjali, I started to explore a little bit with the Tao of physics, and I had this big picture idea of the world that the best thing I could do for my son and everyone else was to learn meditation, learn how to teach other people meditation, raise the consciousness of the world, be part of carrying yoga, a pure yoga, the ideas that I got from Patanjali, that very first reading, to hold that and bring that into the world as an essential resource of values and ethics and ways of being that I saw were in danger of being lost in a tide of meaninglessness. So Nischala and I really came to a heart meeting on this, that we feel responsible for preserving this tradition that's given us so much, that's opened us from the inside, that's brought us to this point right now. And it would be horrible if it was reduced to something that happens in a gym.
Yes, as we were discussing before, and we can get back to again, I guess I'm curious then, were you in the same monastic order with Nischala? Is that how you two met, or a different monastic order?
Totally different.
Yes, I was in a small monastery, a little bit like what's called a beguinage, a collective of women living together, choosing an alternative lifestyle. One thing I knew is married life was not for me. I was not good at it, and that there was a better way for me to live. So mine was, I read yoga, but I also read the Tao of physics in those early times. I read a lot of contemplative Christianity, Sufism. I love studying comparative religions, but when I really focused in on yoga about 15 years ago, learning to read the Sanskrit, going through the texts, wrestling with the words in italics. And, I really took my studies of yoga seriously with Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and places like that, trying to learn Sanskrit. And what was available to me online as a cloistered person who was doing charity work all day, taking people to the hospital, teaching classes, things that monks do, and then studying at the same time. But very different than Nischala's, that was Vedic.
Yeah.
Got you. Well, let me ask you.
Mine was very strict. Yeah, I was very strict.
Well, I just had someone on last week, actually. She's a Vedic chanting teacher from the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram, and we were talking about that very thing, about the strictness of certain things and the importance of that so that they can be kept, but then also where we don't want to have that strictness and where that strictness can actually become an issue or a problem,
Well, I think it's the maturity of the student, too. Because in the beginning, you need the discipline, you need the strictness, because you're coming from this vast world where you could do anything you wanted, and suddenly you're fixed on yoga, and there's a certain amount that has to be done, and then it has to ease up. That's what they forget to do.
That's the ease up part. They sometimes leave the ease up part, don't they?
That's the part they forget. That as you mature, it has to ease. It's like, I don't know if we ever talked about this, training an elephant. This is how it has to be done. Because when an elephant is a baby, a real baby, and you put a thick chain around its leg, it can't go anywhere. And as the elephant grows, the chain gets thinner and thinner. So the adult elephant just has a thin string around it. That's all. But it has the memory that when it was a baby, it had this thick chain and couldn't move. So that's how spiritual life really has to happen to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, it has to start out a certain way, and then it has to lessen because we mature and we can make choices and decisions for ourselves in it.
Well, that's the thing, decisions for yourselves, which isn't always the case when you're in a monastic order. So let me ask you the question I asked Nischala, Kamala, which is, having been in a monastic order for some while, why did you choose to leave it?
Really to work on this project formally I mean, I've sort of been in an in-between place. Several years ago, after some health issues, I knew I needed to do something different. And so instead of living in an ashram, now I live like a hermit. And but as far as being a person who is writing a book and doing a podcast, this is way outside of the lines of a monastic person. So I let's say I've been rebellious for about 5 years, but it's formal now that we're, because of Nischala's wonderful renown and all the work that she's done. I just have so much respect for the years of teaching and the writing that she's done, and I'm so grateful that she was working with me. And so we're able to take this project. For me, bringing a feminine voice to the Bhagavad Gita has been something I knew was my dharma, but within the monastery, it's hard to get your voice out. And I've long been frustrated seeing the direction that yoga is getting so physical, and it's becoming a corporation. It's commodified, and I want to be part of the conversation. And so these are the reasons that I'm left. And
well, I really make that connection too. I fancy myself a little bit of a writer, but these days I never really write more than say 800 words, like a post, because to really write something, especially try to take on what you two are taking on, you kind of do need to remove yourself from stuff. Like, I don't think I could have all the dad responsibilities and husband responsibilities and do this center and try to do what y'all are doing. Like, you have to have the space. So in a way, like monastic life of writing a book, I get it. It makes sense to me too.
Yes.
So how did you two meet, and what was the genesis of the project? Like, how did it come to existence?
I think both of us have been on this project for a long time. And as we've said, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, that every time I took the Gita down and started trying to translate it, I would close it and put it back on the shelf. That was my experience. And that's probably been going on for the last 15 years. I, at one point, endorsed a Gita written by someone quite well known. And as I was reading through it to do the endorsement, I started making notes and how it didn't work. And of course, I gave them a nice endorsement. I won't mention who it was. But what it said to me is half the population of the world has been left out of this book. And that's not okay. That's not okay in this modern world. And trying to change it, actually, my first title years and years ago was, What If Arjuna Was a Woman? So this has been going on for a long time.
That's a very different title.
Very different title. Because what we realized, we actually started that way. And what we realized is it had to be fictionalized to do that. And we weren't those kind of writers. It's a very specific writing ability to do fiction in that way. But it's evolved over the time the process has. And, it's one of those things, Jay, that if it's dharmically in alignment with who you are, it comes to you. And if it's not, you can try all you want and it just doesn't work. And sure enough, I was sitting here one afternoon and received an email that someone was interested in me speaking at their conference. Well, that happens all the time to me. People invite me to things. I thought, sure, fine, have her write to me. I'm fine with it. And then she asked me we did a little interview on the sutras. And then afterwards, she said to me, so what are you interested in? And I said, I'd like to do a translation of the Gita. She said, I know just the person who's also doing that. And she connected us together. And I would say it was probably love at first sight. And we realized that we were kindred spirits. How often do you find another woman who has had a monastic experience in a yoga ashram, not in a Christian situation or setting? So we started formulating it. And then I realized I know the process of writing a book. I know how long it takes. It can take 2-3 years or more until it's published. So I thought, why wait? Let's start a podcast. Let's let people know what we're up to. Let's let people hear what the Gita is about and what our process is. So that's a little bit how it started.
Beautiful. And I think that the podcast also likely is a way for you to be working through stuff while you're working on the book, and maybe even to get some feedback from people while you're working on it, which would probably help you in that process, I think.
Absolutely.
Some yes and some no.
Oh, that's right. Sometimes you don't want anybody to be in on it. That's funny. That's true, though. Sometimes you just got to make it and then let people think whatever they think. I totally know what you mean. It's not all a collaboration between you two, but not the whole world, right?
Exactly. Because if people really understood the woman's role with the Gita, we wouldn't be doing it. It would have been done already.
Well, it's very interesting what you're saying, because one, the story of the Gita is a story of war and of things that we wouldn't necessarily, and I guess I'm falling into traps when I say it, but we wouldn't traditionally think of those as like women's stories.
Right.
So
but who fed the soldiers? Right?
What's that?
Who fed the soldiers?
It's true. But, I was also thinking that.
Who washed their clothes?
I guess my question about that is, I have a voice in my head that just now when I said that, said, well, what is that really true? Can we pigeonhole genders in that way? Like, aren't there women who are mean and violent and men who are soft and kind? So how can we say women are anti-war and men are for war? We can't, can we?
No, we really, I don't think we can pigeonhole, but we can start a dialogue about it. And I think that's what we're trying to do with the podcast, and at least give the women readers of the Gita, I think, first addressing this original problem that, like Nischala, so many of us, or so many women in the yoga community today who are recommended the Gita in their teacher trainings just can't get with it. This issue of the war, I don't understand it. Why does Krishna keep saying, therefore you must kill? I don't understand how this is my spiritual text. Like, I don't get it. Right? So I think we're looking at this original problem that the war is confusing. And especially in the world we live in today, it's not gendered. There's lots of female soldiers today, and there's lots of women who feel, very nationalistic, for example, that feel, like defending their families, that they have a strong role. And I think that's always been a part of women as mothers, to defend our home and our children and our space. But, looking at, I think one of the things we've come to is we have to look at this as a historical story from another time that had a purpose. And the purpose was to codify Krishnaism as a religion, introduce the Upanishads to the masses, and also bring in this idea that in rulership that men do, exclusively men do in the caste system, there's a way to do it right. Right? There's a way to do it with honor and integrity, and the fact that the Pandavas, are good guys in the Mahabharata war, wait and they try all the diplomatic solutions, right? They try to work it through. They try to be the good guys, right? So there's an instructive tale in there to future leaders to say, if you have to fight, you have to be the good guys. Don't be the bad guys and be all corrupt in your motive, right? So I think the Gita has in its lifespan, it's served a lot of different functions before it arrived in our laps here today as yoga teachers trying to make sense of this crazy story with 1 million characters. It was trying to teach people how to be better, is how to uphold Dharma from the Hindu worldview. And but simultaneously it's a yoga text. And that's what we're looking at.
I think that's one of the things that I noticed about the conversations you guys are having about what you're doing is that particular thing you just pointed to, that aspect of the Gita, not just as a spiritual text and maybe some divine revelation, but in the historical context of the time was also maybe, I almost got a note of it could have been almost propagandic in terms of like justifying wars or even if we don't want to look at it that way, like you just said, that as a instructional thing for leaders, actually instructing people to try diplomacy first. But at some point, if diplomacy fails and you do have to go to war, that there would be can we say more ethical way? See, that's sticky, right? Is war ever ethical? And if
No,
see,
it's never
ethical.
No, it's never ethical.
Yes.
Yeah, because what are ethics? You have to look at the word ethics and what is it? Ethics means to do something in a higher level way, in a particular way. And if you are in there killing people, who are these people that you're killing? So maybe the one or two that you're angry at, but what about all the collateral damage? What about all the things that happen? What about all the deaths? What about all the maiming of people? So when we look at the difference between men and women, I don't think we have to do it in prejudicial ways, but we really have to look at it also biologically. Men have testosterone and it makes them more aggressive. That's what it does. That's one of the jobs of it. So when we're looking at this and we're saying, why weren't there women involved? Were there women on the council that were helping making these ethical decisions? No. So it was the soldiers trying to make ethical decisions. And you have to be very careful with that because what is the background of the soldier? Who are they? Do they have the ability to make ethical decisions? And that's why I think also when you look at the modern day military, they also include chaplains. They include religious people in that field, in that ability, because it's not just moral and ethical. There's also spiritual considerations here. And I think that's something that we have to really look at when we look at the Gita and we look at life in general. Who are we hurting and how much are we helping?
I hear everything you're saying. I think it's very interesting, the idea that the Gita would be utilized as an anti-war calling. Yeah. I've not heard that before. Again, that's a unique idea. I guess the other question I have about that, and this is maybe the most, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment and ask you both a hard question.
Go ahead.
Because the last person I had on the podcast, when I talked about the Gita, we talked about it as a form of divine revelation, which many people consider it.
Yes.
So,
and my guess is it was a man. Is that correct?
It was.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Conceded. What I would say is that I'm sure there's many women who consider the Bhagavad Gita a form of divine revelation as well, not just men.
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, I imagine so. The question I have though is, I get a sense that maybe you don't, but if it is divine revelation, and I heard you say something, Nischala, in one of your podcasts specifically about this, when you were talking about, one, the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. And then you were also talking about how if you see something in it, like there's no female pronouns or there's like no mention of women, as you saying, like women are left out of it, from a progressive value place, I completely agree. We should not just stand by that. We should change that, at least in how we live and how we think. But changing that and how we think and how we live isn't the same thing as like rewriting a historical document. And if it's divine revelation, who are we to change it? Is it our place to make those kinds of changes? And again, I say it, I'm coming at it from a devil's advocate point to challenge you a little.
So, well, that's a great question. You want to start, Nischala?
Either one. You can start if you want.
Well, for me, the Gita is my home text, right? That is my happy place. For years, I was sort of able to relegate the war to, all right, that's just that part. Let me get into the good stuff here. And this project has brought up a lot of this sort of tension. What is it? What is it? Who wrote it? Who said it? Who, was it Krishna actually on the battlefield? And they wrote it all down word for word. I think this idea of a single divine revelation is a part of religion that we also need to talk about. We need to talk about the war in this case, right? That idea that a revelation exists exactly as it was decreed in ancient history. I think we've learned from the work on the Christian Bible that so many translations over so many times, and it was in Greek and Aramaic, and what we're looking at today, is it? I don't know. I don't really know. I know that the Gita, being, of course, in the Sanskrit language, is preserved differently than texts that are coming from dead languages like Aramaic. But I think when we read it in the Sanskrit, we can very much get that feeling of the text and the conveyance of something mystical, numinous, beyond any religious structure. But as far as divine revelation goes, I think Nischala and I are confronting the idea that part of what is included in this idea of divine revelation is an inherent oppression of women, because it's authorizing the caste system. And we just can't get around that. So I think the question I have to answer is, do I think that, as Krishna says in the Gita, where he says, I created the four Varna system in chapter 4, I think we're saying we don't want to bring this forward. We don't want to bring the caste system forward. We don't want to bring the advocacy of war forward in the same way the Gita has for all of these years. We are people in a different situation, in a different civilization, in a different gender, who feel it's their dharma to reject the caste system and reject our caste system. In the Western world, it's racism. We have the advantage today of the important work Isabel Wilkerson has done on caste, and bringing a different context to the hierarchies that I originally rejected 30 years ago, is this patriarchal hierarchy, which is a big part of the Gita. And all we can do is stand in an educated and respectful non-compliance with conscientious objectors to the caste system in the Gita. I do not believe that was a divine revelation. I believe the mystical insights are absolutely beyond this world, but the social, religious, and the human structure of it, I think people did that.
I think in order to have a divine revelation, you have to include everybody. I think everyone has to be included. They have to be shown as equal, maybe not exactly the same duties, etc. And as far as I'm concerned, most of what you're calling historical texts need to be rewritten. If they're not, it continues the same prejudices, the same abuse of women in these countries that is abhorrent. There has to be a stop to it. And as long as people keep using a scriptural reference as a way to keep women down, the scriptures have to be changed. When we talk about historical reference, we're also bringing through the prejudices of the day. That's why I chose the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras are clean. There's no historical reference. There's no ability to put this one down or this. There's very little gender reference even in it. So when we take something like this and we look at it, and you have to understand, we love it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. We see the gems, the spiritual gems in it, but it's buried in muck. It's buried in these prejudices. It's buried in this darkness that has to be extricated. Otherwise, people will never know it's there. It's like looking at a raw diamond. Most people wouldn't even know it was a diamond. It has to be polished. It has to be brought out.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.